José Abreu and Freddie Freeman are your 2020 MVPs. Kim Ang is the new general manager of the Miami Marlins following a historic hire, and Mike Clevinger has signed a 2-year deal with the Padres, but he also needs Tommy John surgery. Hello, everyone, and welcome into this Tuesday, November 17th edition of Around the Bases from 110 Sports. Live streaming here, as always, on the 110 Sports Network at 110sportsmedia, media.com/live, as well as twitch.tv/110sports, and along with all of our other 110 programming, available on demand on the website, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Just search for 110 Sports. We've got a lot to get to today here on this Tuesday broadcast. A good deal of storylines have come up, and news items and developments have come up over the course of the past 4 or 5 days, including just today, an announcement about an executive of the year, but also the big one, breaking news involving the Chicago Cubs and their front office. So we'll talk about that here in just a couple of minutes. I do want to start you off, though, with our rundown, what you can expect today on this show. We're going to jump into our top four right away. We're going to talk about the two players that were named MVP on Thursday. We're going to talk about the Marlins' historic hiring of Kim Ang to be their next general manager. The Hall of Fame ballot was announced yesterday. The 2021 Hall of Fame ballot was announced. Not the results, just the names that are on the ballot, which technically we already knew, but it's official. The season for debating who belongs in the Hall of Fame has begun, and also the news about Mike Clevinger, sort of a really quick roller coaster ride from great news to bad news really quickly with Mike Clevinger. So we'll talk about that here today on the show. We'll go through some of the latest hot stove signings and reports. There's been one really notable signing over the last couple of days, and also a ton of reports about players and teams they may be interested in, teams and players they may be interested. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the latest rumblings and what they may mean. News and notes, as always, a couple of items popping up today on that. And then today's big segment, we're going to get into my predictions for MLB's top 10 free agents, what kind of contract they're going to get, and where they're going to end up. My prediction for where they'll end up, but also some other logical teams for those players to end up signing with. We've had one of those players actually publish this article a while back. One of those players, we know where they're going to play in 2020. We'll talk about that. But the other 9, they're free agents. It's still early in the offseason. It's only mid-November. There's plenty of time. But we're going to talk about the market for those players and where I think they may end up. There's certainly some big names in the top 4 or 5 especially of those players. And then we'll end the show, as we always do, with what's on deck, talking about what you can expect coming up here in the next couple of days in the baseball world and here at 110 Sports. So before we get into our top 4, actually, we are following this morning and this afternoon some breaking news involving the Chicago Cubs, and that's actually where I want to start. Is with this big announcement just a short time ago that Theo Epstein will be stepping down from his role as the president of baseball operations for the Chicago Cubs. The team announced that today, just about an hour ago. Jed Hoyer, who currently serves as the club's executive vice president and general manager, he will be taking over as president of baseball ops. He'll be running that department. In a statement, Epstein saying, quote, "For the rest of my life, I will cherish having been a part of a great Chicago Cubs organization during this historic period." And immediately after this news broke, there was speculation and wondering about whether Epstein would be potentially leaving to join the Mets front office. Of course, the Mets, with their new owner and their new president, looking for a new person to run their baseball operations department. The Phillies also in a search for a top executive. So there was some thought that Epstein could be potentially landing there, but it's been reported by MLB Network's John Morosi that Epstein plans to take the 2021 season off. So that would seemingly remove him from any consideration for those 2 high-profile front office vacancies. In his statement, Epstein also said, quote, "Next summer will be my first in 30 years not clocking into work every day at a major league ballpark. I do plan on having a 3rd chapter leading a baseball organization someday, though I do not expect it to be next year. Now, that quote coming from a letter that Epstein wrote to people within the Cubs organization that was obtained by The Athletic. So that's pretty clear indication from Epstein that he's going to be taking a year off at least or more, but that he doesn't think he's done with baseball and leading and playing a large role in a baseball franchise, but that he thinks his time with the Cubs, should come to an end. And of course, the Cubs are in an interesting situation right now. First of all, Epstein himself was entering the final year of his contract with the Cubs, and they have four big players: Chris Bryant, Anthony Rizzo, Javier Baez, and Kyle Schwarber, four of their core hitters, who are all set to be free agents after next season. So there's just one season left of team control for all four of those players, which make this a really potentially transformative offseason for the Cubs. Now, of course, Epstein could have said, I'm going to stick around for the year, these players stick around for the year, and then maybe he leaves then, and it's like, okay, figure it out. But he's seeming to know that, like this is going to be a big offseason for them if they want to avoid just going through and having those players all hit free agency, whether it be that they extend a player or two of those guys or trade one or two or both. That this is a crucial offseason for them to figure out what their next direction is going to be. Epstein deciding that he didn't think that apparently didn't want to be a part of that next step for the Cubs, and decided, okay, what's best then that I get out of the way now. Essentially, he first joined the Cubs after the 2011 season, and of course there was a rebuilding period for the Cubs there for several years, and then of course the Cubs breaking their World Series title drought, 108 years with their win in the World Series in 2016. But again, this is pretty big news when it comes to a transformative executive, a big executive of a baseball team who made a major impact on a team that, of course, the Cubs will be remembered for what they did in 2016 forever, and breaking that streak. So it's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out. But at least for the foreseeable future, Epstein not going to be taking a role, he says, with another baseball team immediately. And as far as the Cubs, Jed Hoyer has been their general manager for a good while as well. So it should be a pretty seamless transition there. So, but he is going to be tasked with figuring out what the next direction of this Cubs team is going to be. Like I said, they're in an interesting spot. They can technically just run it back and say, let's do this group, this core one more time, one more year, and we'll see what happens. But then after that, if that falls, assuming that were to fall short, if it did fall short, then you're left with those four core players hitting free agency, and you don't know where you're going. So it will be an interesting offseason for the Chicago Cubs. But now I'd like to get into our top four, our regularly scheduled top four. We're going to start with this. And at the time of our show, Around the Bases last Thursday, three of the four sets of the major awards have been announced. Kyle Lewis of the Seattle Mariners, and the Brewers' Devin Williams were named Rookie of the Year. Kevin Cash of the Rays and Don Mattingly of the Marlins were named Manager of the Year, and Cleveland's Shane Bieber and Cincinnati's Trevor Bauer were named your Cy Young winners for the AL and NL in 2020. No real surprises there, and that did not change on Thursday night, the evening after our last broadcast, as two first basemen, White Sox José Abreu and the Braves' Freddie Freeman, were named AL and NL MVP. This is the first time that a first baseman has won an MVP since Joey Votto back in 2010, which is quite amazing to me that it's been that long since a first baseman has won MVP, and of course this year we have two. As for Abreu, he is the fourth player in MLB history to lead the American League in both hits and RBI in a season. He led baseball in RBI. He had 60 in a 60-game season, which was phenomenal. He led baseball in total bases with 146. He became the third Cuban-born player to win MVP, and the first White Sox player since Frank Thomas in 1994, I should say. Jose Ramirez finished second in the voting, the third baseman for the Indians, with that late season surge. And so there were people who expected or believed that he should win MVP, but Jose Abreu, of course, very, very deserving. DJ LeMahieu of the Yankees finished third, followed by Shane Bieber and Mike Trout finishing fifth. And a fifth place finish in MVP balloting for Mike Trout is actually his worst ever if you're subtracting out his rookie season. So fifth place, I mean that's quite that's quite a good finish, but that's actually the worst Mike Trout has ever placed minus his rookie season in MVP balloting. That being said, he does now have the longest streak of top 5 finishes in the MVP race in MLB history. 9 straight seasons now, Mike Trout has finished in the top 5 in AL MVP balloting. That's a new MLB record. And as for Freddie Freeman, he claimed MVP votes 5 other times in his career, but he'd never gotten the award, and he finally won after a sensational season in the shortened campaign that began with him battling COVID-19 during training camp, and he was very sick. If you'll remember, we talked about it here on the show as that was all playing out. Freeman had COVID-19. He was very sick. He was able to make it back, though, for the beginning of the season. And he becomes the first Atlanta player since Chipper Jones in 1999 to win MVP. He ranked first or second in the National League in all of these things: runs, doubles, extra base hits, Fangraphs WAR, average, on-base percentage, slugging percentage, OPS, RBI, total bases. I mean, he was one of the top 2 players in the league in all of those stats. So very well-deserved award for Freddie Freeman. Mookie Betts, great first season in LA, finished second. Manny Machado with a resurgence in San Diego, he finished third. Fernando Tatis Jr., his teammate on the left side of the infield, finished fourth in the balloting, and Juan Soto of the Nationals. An incredible season. He missed some time at the beginning, and of course the Nationals weren't good, but just a sensational season from the rate stats, especially for Juan Soto, so that should not be lost in all of that. But Freddie Freeman and José Abreu, your MVP winners. A funny little note here about the balloting for the MVP on the National League side. Cubs reliever Ryan Tepera, and I'm not sure I'm saying that name right, to be completely honest, he was listed among the players who received a vote by the writers, the Baseball Writers Association of America. The middle reliever had a 3.92 ERA this year. Like, he was fine, he was good, but like that's a middle reliever who, like, frankly not many people had heard of. And it turns out that a writer for the paper in St. Louis, the Post-Dispatch, Rick Hummel, who had been voting for the MVP for decades, he intended to vote for Trey Turner, but it's apparently when you select your choices, it's just a scrolling list, and he clicked on the wrong name, and all of a sudden you have Ryan Tepera as receiving an MVP vote. So an interesting story there. Tepera tweeting, "One man's mistake is another man's claim to an NL MVP vote. Thanks, Rick, honored by the vote." And Hummel said, Hummel, making light of the situation, of course, apologizing for what happened, but he said, people would think I've lost my marbles. Trey Turner should have one more point. He's a great player, or a good player. So an interesting side story there to what was generally a normal, uncontroversial set of awards from MVP all the way to Manager of the Year, Rookie of the Year, and Cy Young as well. Our next top 4 item today, and this is a big one in the baseball world, in the world of sports overall. The Marlins naming Kim Ng as their next general manager, a historic hire that in itself carries a great deal of meaning. Ng becomes the first Asian American general manager in MLB history, and she is also believed to be the first female general manager for any of the major men's professional sports leagues in North America, ever. So all the major sports leagues in North America that are men's sports, she is now the first female general manager. It was a historic and an outstanding thing to see. And an important note here, there are of course currently several female general managers for women's professional teams here in the U.S. and in North America broadly. But this is the first time where you have young girls and young women able to see that they can rise to the top levels of administration in men's sports. And at her introductory press conference Monday, so yesterday, Ang said basically that. She said, quote, "There's an adage, you can't be it if you can't see it." This was what she said at her introductory press conference. She said that, and she said, "Now you can see it. I look forward to hearing all the stories and just how inspired they are to pursue a job in sports, a job in baseball, and to reach for the stars." So, a really monumental hire for Major League Baseball, for the sports world, and something that look, representation matters. It's really important, and for people to see that is a really big thing. But it also should be noted in all of this that this was not a publicity hire. This was a make the Marlins a better franchise hire. Kim Ng has 30 plus seasons in Major League Baseball. She started as an intern with the White Sox when she was 21 or 22 years old. She eventually became an assistant general manager with the Yankees, an assistant general manager with the Dodgers, and then eventually around 2010-2011 she became a senior vice president for baseball operations for Major League Baseball. She has 3 World Series rings, 8 postseason appearances as an executive with the Dodgers and Yankees, 2 very successful franchises, of course. And Kim Ng has been among the most qualified general manager candidates for the better part of the last 2 decades, based on her experience, based on her reputation throughout the game, and what she did in these front offices. The move, of course, the decision by the Marlins, praise for her and her ability and her skills and everything coming from the Yankees, from the Dodgers, from throughout the baseball world. It was really great to see, of course. And Marlins chairman and majority owner Bruce Sherman, in introducing her, Kim Ng, at the press conference yesterday, saying, quote, "I can't think of anyone more qualified for the position than Kim." And that's very true. Very true. I mean, the resume here is outstanding. So this was a long time coming. It was something that should have happened a long time ago, but something absolutely to be celebrated. Of course, it's an interesting position that she is now in with the Marlins, in that she takes control of a baseball operations department alongside CEO Derek Jeter, for a Marlins team that's on the rise. And we've talked about this. The team coming off their first playoff appearance in 17 years, their first winning season in 11 years. The Marlins, a very exciting young team that looks like all of a sudden, hey, they may not need many more years of this rebuild. They're ready to go. I'm not saying that's a perfect situation, that they're like going to be necessarily picked to make the playoffs again in 2021, automatically or anything like that. But this is a team on the rise that she will now have a chance to make her imprint on and make those decisions. So a really great thing to see, a historic day for Major League Baseball. That was a historic event for Major League Baseball, absolutely. All right, our next top 4 storyline, and I mentioned this back on the Thursday show, at the end of our Thursday show last week, in our What's on Deck segment. The 2020 Hall of Fame ballot was released yesterday. And it's actually quite possible we could see no new players be inducted as part of the class of 2021. So let's break that down a little bit. Let's start with the 11 names that are on the new names, the 11 new names that are on the ballot this season. And just as a refresher or information, if you didn't know, to become eligible for the Hall of Fame, a player must have played at least 10 major league seasons, and they must have been retired for 5 years. And to get into the Hall of Fame, a player must receive 75% of the vote, and those votes coming from the members of the Baseball Writers Association of America. So your 11 new names this year are Mark Burley, A.J. Burnett, Michael Kadire, Dan Herron, LaTroy Hawkins, Tim Hudson, Torrey Hunter, Aramis Ramirez, Nick Swisher, Shane Victorino, and Barry Zito. So if nothing else, this is a really fun group of players. I really enjoy a group of players that was really enjoyable to watch play. But there are really no sure things for the Hall of Fame in this group. Of this group, only Mark Burley, Tim Hudson, two starters, and Torrey Hunter, the outfielder, would seem to have any real chance at all of potentially making the Hall of Fame. Of course, there are surprises, but that's the three that you could see as having really any shot of that group. And the history of voting for the Hall of Fame would seem to indicate that if any of those players were to get in and get that 75% threshold, it would probably take a few years. You have basically the way it works again. The way it works is that players remain on the ballot for 10 years before dropping off if they don't get to the 75% threshold. And players that are not slam dunks, I mean, clearly with Mark Burley, Tim Hudson, Torrey Hunter, any one of them could get in, of course. But of players of that caliber, where it's not, incredibly obvious, it's probably going to take some time if it does happen. So there's no obvious first ballot Hall of Famer like with Derek Jeter and Mariano Rivera and Chipper Jones like we've seen in recent years. So I'm not expecting any of those newcomers to get elected this year. It's possible. It's possible. I guess Torrey Hunter, if one of them were to be first ballot, it would be Torrey Hunter. But again, I really don't see that. I really think that if any of them gets in, it's not going to be this year. So as for the names that are returning to the ballot this year, there are really no sure things either. There are players, again, like I said, players remain on the ballot for 10 years before they drop off if they're not elected. So there are 14 players who are returning to the ballot this year. A handful of players here we'll start with Bobby Abreu, Andy Pettitte, Sammy Sosa, Andrew Jones, Jeff Kent, Manny Ramirez, Todd Helton, Gary Sheffield, and Billy Wagner. Now, all of those players have never gotten more than 1/3 of the vote. Never gotten more than 33.3%. So it seems highly unlikely that any of them would get in the Hall of Fame this year. Incredibly unlikely. Then there's the next tier of players, which is Scott Rowland, the third baseman. He's just above a third at 35.3%. And Omar Vizquel, his numbers, his percentage, the shortstop, his percentage has been 52.6%. Both those players may not be getting the attention that they deserve. Both of them are in their fourth year on the ballot, so there's time for both of them. Of course, the 35.3% for Rowland, it makes it seem unlikely that he's going to be able to climb that much, but Vizquel at 52.6%, there's a chance that gets there, especially since he's just in year 4. He also could get a higher percentage of the vote this year given the decrease in obviously worthy candidates on the ballot this year. So that's that middle tier. But really it comes down to these three players at the top who have gotten the closest among the returners to getting in, and they're all in their 9th year of eligibility. Their second to last shot. And it's an interesting group. It's Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, and Curt Schilling. Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens both basically at 61%. Curt Schilling 70%, which is just 5% away from what you need to get in the Hall of Fame. And the arguments for these players are nothing new. So this isn't a new storyline, and I'm not going to get into a whole 20-minute thing about these players and whether players from the steroid era and who have been known to have taken steroids should get in. I don't want to get into that whole debate because that's a whole other topic that we could spend a whole show on. But of course, like I said, the arguments for those players, nothing new. Bonds and Clemens connected to the steroids, of course, and Schilling a very polarizing figure. And this could be Schilling's year, though. His percentage of votes has climbed steadily in recent years, and he's at 70%. Bonds and Clemens' percentages, they've risen more slowly, so it seems less likely. But again, a ballot where there's not as many obvious candidates, we could see some guys picking up higher percentages than they have in the past. And my take, again, without getting into a full-on discussion of this topic, I think Bonds and Clemens should be in the Hall of Fame. Not strongly, I think I probably have them in, but I'm certainly not going to be upset if they don't make it. As for Schilling, it's a more borderline case from a numbers perspective, of course. A very polarizing figure for mostly things that have come after his playing career. But again, looking at the numbers alone, though, I still think Schilling is a borderline case. But from an, I again, like Bonds and Clemens, I'm not somebody who's really caught up in this situation where I'm just going to care that much about whether they get in or not. But at the end of the day, the results will be announced on January 26th. And even if no one is elected, or maybe it's just one person, for example, the candidates who were elected this past year, that's Derek Jeter, Larry Walker, Ted Simmons, and Marvin Miller, they'll be inducted at the 2021 Hall of Fame ceremony scheduled for July 25th of this upcoming year, because this past year's ceremony, or this year's ceremony, back in July was postponed, or was pushed. They were going to honor the people this upcoming year instead, because of the pandemic and everything there. All right, final top four item for you today. Not going to spend a lot of time on this one, but a lot to take in and an update from the Padres yesterday afternoon on Mike Clevinger. A tweet from the Padres, and it's a bit of a interesting situation. So the first sentence of the tweet they sent out was, "The Padres have signed right-handed pitcher Mike Clevinger to a 2-year contract through the 2022 season." It's like, okay, 2-year contract for Mike Clevinger. All right. And then they add on, Clevinger will also undergo Tommy John surgery on Tuesday. So, alrighty then. Clevinger expected to miss all of next season. His deal is worth $11.5 million, which, for a 2-year deal, that seems crazy for a pitcher of his caliber, but essentially, right, it'll be a 1-year, $11.5 million deal, because he's not going to pitch this year. He'll get paid for both years, but essentially it's a 1-year, $11.5 million contract for 2022 signed in advance, where he'll be able to rehab with the team and their facilities and everything. Clevinger suffered a right elbow strain, or if you'll recall, in one of his final regular season starts. He was able to start, or the team, had him start in the NLDS, in the NLDS against the Dodgers, but he was pulled after just 24 pitches and then removed from the team's playoff roster due to a reoccurrence of the elbow issue. He was acquired from the Indians at the trade deadline in a 6-player package, and he posted a strong 2.84 ERA in 4 starts with the Padres before getting injured. A.J. Preller, general manager for the Padres, say he didn't believe it was any sort of injury that Clevinger had before the trade. The Padres' rotation without Clevinger for next year, Dinelson Lamet, great year in 2020, breakout, Zach Davies, Chris Paddock, Joey Lucchesi, and then TBD in that 5th spot. So it's good, but not great. So maybe we see the Padres, they've incredible breakout year in 2020. Maybe we see them go after a frontline starting pitcher. Maybe they try to trade for Lance Lynn or something. He's got a year left on his contract, something like that, or go acquire a free agent who can deliver some reliable innings. We'll see what they do, but they've got to find rotation. They're not in trouble if they don't make a big move, but with Clevinger out, a sizable move could make a really big difference for the Padres in improving another step forward. All right, so we are almost halfway past the hour. It's coming up on 1:30 Eastern here on this Tuesday, November 17th. We're going to go ahead and take our first break of the show. When we come back, we'll talk the latest hot stove signings, reports, some news and notes, and then we'll talk about some of my predictions for MLB's top 10 free agents this offseason. That's coming up next here on Around the Bases from 110 Sports. All right, welcome back into this Tuesday, November 17th edition of Around the Bases from 110 Sports. A lot to get to here in the second half of today's show, so let's just jump right in to some of the latest developments here in terms of signings and reports and trade rumors here this offseason. We're going to start with this. The second really notable signing of the offseason went down yesterday as the Braves inked left-handed starter Drew Smyly to a one-year, $11 million contract. Now, health has been a concern for Smyly over the years, but the 31-year-old pitched to a 3.42 ERA, a really impressive 2.01 FIP, his fielding independent pitching metric, an ERA estimator. It also struck out 42 batters compared to just 9 walks in 5 starts and 2 relief outings this past season after signing a one-year deal of a smaller amount with San Francisco. So he was really good when healthy and on the mound this past season, Smyly was. And there was a change for him in terms of his, what he was doing aside from just the results. As his average fastball velocity increased significantly, his swing and miss percentage was then up. His ground ball to fly ball ratio was the best of his career again. We're talking about a small sample size, but it was an impressive, 7 appearances for Drew Smyly this past season. It's a smart gamble for the Braves. I know $11 million is obviously it's not a small cost, but in the baseball context, it's still not a cheap cost, but it's also not that high risk. And the Braves didn't need an ace. They don't, need somebody to necessarily go out and throw 200 innings and be an ace. They've got Max Fried and Mike Soroka potentially returning early in the season, hopefully, from his torn Achilles, and Ian Anderson with his breakout postseason, and then likely Kyle Wright. So they're in a fine spot. They didn't need an ace, like I said, but a good gamble here for the Braves in signing Drew Smyly. And, look, combine that really solid rotation he'll slot into alongside Fried, Anderson, likely Kyle Wright, Mike Soroka returning. And that's a pretty good rotation. Combine it with that offense, you've got a team that's going to be poised to have another great season. It's also a good deal for Smyly, in my opinion, especially when you consider we're in a market where one of the best closers in baseball over the last several years, Brad Hand, nobody was willing to pay him $10 million for 1 year. Every baseball team had an opportunity to do so, and they didn't. So it's going to be a really weird winter where it just doesn't make a lot of sense. You have one of the best relievers in baseball. Nobody's willing to pay him $10 million for a year, but you have a starter who had a short, good stretch, who's injury prone, and doesn't have the best track record, and you're giving him $11 million. I'm not saying it's a bad deal for the Braves as much as it's just a confusing situation of where the market stands. It's going to be interesting to watch that play out this offseason. As for a couple of recent reports, when it comes to free agents, late last week, John Heyman of MLB Network reported that 10 teams, including the Braves, are showing interest in Marcell Ozuna. A New York Post report from this week indicates that the Mets are among the teams showing interest. So, going to be a big market for him. It's just going to be interesting to see. Again, we have no guarantee. It's looking likely we'll have a DH in the NL in 2021, but no guarantee. So, will a team like the Braves or other NL teams be, confident enough to give Ozuna a multi-year deal based on that? We'll see. Again, another player who's especially limited to DH, Nelson Cruz. There's apparently mutual interest in a reunion between him and the Twins, but apparently at this point there's been little progress in contract talks according to the Athletic, and no decision is expected soon from him. That's a player who is really, really waiting, to see get some certainty with the DH, potentially in the National League. MLB.com's Peter Gammons reported that Jackie Bradley Jr. is a priority for the Astros this offseason, as George Springer and Michael Brantley are both free agents, could both leave, so they have holes in the outfield. The Blue Jays and the Mets are among 4 teams interested in pitcher Jake Odorizzi. ESPN's Buster Olney reported that over the weekend. Odorizzi struggled with the Twins this past year, but in 2019 he was an all-star for the first time and had a really great season and made 30 starts. Finally, Rich Hill, the 40-year-old lefty, is coming off a one-year deal with the Twins, and he isn't ready to call it a career just yet, telling WEEI that he really wants to win a World Series and he's looking to play for a contender, and he's not ready to hang it up just yet. Hill had a 3.03 ERA in roughly 40 innings for the Twins this year. He's been a guy who struggled with health, but when he's been healthy, he's been consistently a really, really good starting pitcher. As for a couple of possible trades and trade discussions and trade reports of rumors and possibilities, Robert Murray of Fansided reports that the Brewers are planning to listen on trade offers for Josh Hader, their relief ace, and that they're interested, that it's a priority for the team to add hitters this offseason. The New York Post, Joel Sherman, Ken Davidoff, and Dan Martin are reporting that the Yankees are at minimum going to listen to offers on Gary Sanchez. Follows a report from John Heyman that the Yankees are among the clubs that are interested in Yadier Molina. And of course, a situation where Gary Sanchez not guaranteed to be the starting catcher for the Yankees in 2020 as 2021 as we talked about. So we'll see how that plays out. Let's move on now to news and notes. Hall of Fame manager Tommy Lasorda has been hospitalized in California. The Dodgers announced that over the weekend, the team saying that the 93-year-old was admitted into intensive care and is resting comfortably, but the cause of the situation was not disclosed. Lasorda managed the Dodgers for 21 years from 1976 to 1996, winning 2 World Series titles. Red Sox starter Eduardo Rodriguez told MLB Network Radio on Thursday that he expects to be 100% ready for the start of the 2021 season. That's great to hear. Rodriguez was diagnosed with a heart condition after battling COVID-19 this past summer. He even struggling to walk at one point, but he has recently embarked on a throwing program and is fortunately doing much better now. Dodgers president of baseball operations Andrew Freeman was named MLB's Executive of the Year today. Ballots were cast by each of the MLB teams prior to the beginning of the playoffs. So Andrew Friedman named MLB Executive of the Year. He's been at the helm of the Dodgers since 2014 after leaving the Rays, and of course the Dodgers, with the best record in baseball this year, went on to win the World Series. And finally, the Brewers denied the Mets permission to interview their president of baseball operations and general manager David Stearns to run their baseball operations department. John Morosi of MLB Network reported that today. The Mets, of course, looking for a president of baseball operations, contacted the Brewers. They said, yeah, you can't interview our guy for the exact same type of role, and that's not something that's uncommon as far as a team denying permission. That is a common, relatively common practice. All right, we're going to go ahead and transition now here into our other big topic of the day, and that is my predictions for the landing spots and for the contracts of MLB's top free agents this offseason. Of course, we've talked about it here on the show last week. I talked about how I thought it was going to be a long winter, and I still do. And I think it's going to be a long winter in terms of signings. I think it's going to be a slow winter. We've seen, yes, these 2 pitchers who were signed, but they weren't any of the big names, and I think it's a situation, as I'm pulling up my predictions here, I think it's a situation where we are still likely to have a very long winter. I still expect that fully to be a long winter in terms of signings, but there are a number of high-profile free agents on the market, and I think that at the end of the day, they're still going to get pretty big contracts. I still think that the top guys, I think it's going to be more the middle tier that really hurts from the nature of this offseason, the uncertainty with COVID-19 and projections for revenue and whatnot for clubs. So I want to talk now about some of the top free agents. I ranked them in an article at 110sportsmedia.com a week or so back, and it's still timely because only one player has anything really changed for, and we'll talk about that. But I want to discuss the players I ranked in my top 10 and where I think they're going to end up. A couple of players who did not make the top 10 but were also considered: shortstop Marcus Semien. There's a lot of teams that need a shortstop. Another shortstop, Andrelton Simmons. Neither of them made the cut, but they're both quality starting shortstops who I think could land a decent-sized multi-year deal. Reliever Liam Hendricks, formerly of the A's. Masahiro Tanaka and Jake Odorizzi formerly of the Yankees and the Twins. I think that they could get multi-year deals, and they're solid starting pitchers, not top tier. And then outfielder Jackie Bradley Jr., we talked about him a minute ago with the ties to Houston, and reliever Brad Hand, who we talked about as well, as I brought up that as an example. But my 10th ranked free agent this offseason is Nelson Cruz. And we've talked about Nelson Cruz before here on this show plenty of times. He continued to defy Father Time in 2020. He had the fifth highest home run total, the fourth highest OPS in the American League in 2020. His production just declined very slightly down the stretch because he was dealing with an injury. He was clearly connected. But the 40-year-old now, Nelson Cruz is 40, and he's looking for a 2-year deal, which would normally be preposterous. But this is a guy who just keeps smashing, hitting 40 home runs or at that pace every year for like the past 4, 5, 6 years now. He's strictly a DH at this point, as we talked about. So the current lack of clarity about whether that'll for sure be in the National League in 2021 affects his market. Makes me think that he's probably not going to be signing for a little while, at least as they maybe try to get some clarity. Because if you're a National League team, unless you have to be 100% confident that there's going to be a DH in 2021 to sign Cruz, to even entertain it. Because you can't sign him, and then all of a sudden if something happens and there's no DH, there's nowhere to put him. He's not playing in the field for any amount of regular time. So I feel like that's a situation where he's probably going to be a while before he signs. The White Sox, the Blue Jays, the Rays, they could all make sense. My prediction, though, is he ends up back with the Twins after a little time goes by. I don't think he'll get the 2-year deal, but I think he'll get 1 year. $17 million is my prediction, and I'm standing by that. Again, these numbers, I'm not an expert at estimating salaries or contracts, but I'm basing this off of other of what I've seen from contracts in the past and other people's predictions and my thoughts on their market. So that's my prediction for Nelson Cruz. The 9th ranked free agent for me is a shortstop, and it's Didi Gregorius. He bet on himself last winter and took a 1-year deal with the Phillies. He had come back the year before from Tommy John, and he wasn't really himself completely at the plate. So then he takes a 1-year deal with the Phillies, and it paid off. He had been with the Yankees the year before, and again, come back from Tommy John, wasn't great. With the Phillies, though, he rebounded with an 827 OPS. He was very, very good. He had 10 home runs, a 284 average this past season. He cut down on his strikeouts, showed that great power, but there were some concerning signs from under the hood. If you look at his numbers, an average exit velocity was just really, really poor. He just doesn't hit the ball hard at all. So there are some red flags with Gregorius, and his defense isn't really particularly exceptional that I think that'll prevent him from securing a 3-4-5-year deal. Maybe he gets 3. I'm predicting he gets 3. But I don't think he's going to get anything bigger than that. Like, there are flaws. And I think a return to there are several teams that need shortstops or that could use shortstops and move guys around from the Phillies to the Blue Jays if they move Bo Bichette to another position, to the Reds, they need a shortstop. The Angels with Andrelton Simmons now gone, they could turn to David Fletcher. There are options, but a lot of teams could use a Gregorius type player, and I think he'll end up with the Reds. That's my prediction. I say 3 years, $30 million. It's very possible he ends up just taking a 2-year deal. He's a player whose market I could see getting hurt, just given the other shortstops on the market and some of the red flags with him, but I'm predicting a 3-year, $30 million deal with the Reds for Didi Gregorius. They're without a starting shortstop now. Freddie Galvis is gone. He wasn't a long-term answer anyway, so I think that's my prediction for them. Maybe they sign Andrelton, maybe they sign Simmons, maybe they sign Simeon instead, but that's my prediction. The eighth ranked free agent that I have for this offseason is third baseman Justin Turner. And of course, right now your first thought with Turner probably comes to his reckless decision to return to the field for the Dodgers after they won the World Series in their celebration after he had tested positive for COVID-19. And since then, we've learned no punishment is going to come from him, and whether you agree with that or disagree with that, as for his free agent status, it's not going to be affected by what happened at the end of the World Series. It's just not. Now, he is going to be 36 years old on opening day. He's not a kid. He's dealt with injury problems, but he's enjoyed a highly productive run with the Dodgers. He's averaged 26 homers per 162 games over the last 6 years, hit roughly 300. He's, again, like I said, injuries are common, so he's not going, you look at his numbers, you don't see 30 home runs, 28. It's lower than that because pretty much every year he ends up missing like 20, 30 games. It just kind of happens. but he is very productive when on the field, no doubt about that. A good hitter, a 300 like caliber hitter with solid pop and solid but not great defense in the hot corner. So there are a lot of teams that could use an upgrade at third. From the Nationals, there's a lot of uncertainty there. The Blue Jays need a replacement for Travis Shaw, assuming that they don't move Bo Bichette and get a shortstop and move Bo Bichette to third. But I'm going to predict Turner back to the Dodgers. It would seem weird to have him wearing any other uniform other than the Dodgers at this point. He's sort of this, he's not the face of the franchise, but he's this sort of this real big leader figure for the Dodgers, a big part of their organization, and I think he goes back to LA. 2 years, $28 million is my prediction. My seventh ranked free agent is an outfielder, and it is technically, if you're not considering Marcell Ozuna, spoiler alert, he's up here higher on the list, then Brantley is the second ranked outfielder for me among the free agents. He is going to be 33 years old. He has also dealt with injury problems throughout his career. He is a guy who does not have great power, but he is a solid defender in the corners and just a great hitter. He's just this 300 hitter year after year after year. He hit exactly 300 in 2020. He's just this really good, solid hitter, on-base percentage guy. And there are a lot of teams that could use that. I mean, the Nationals could use an outfield. The Cardinals always need outfield help. The Braves could replace Ozuna with him. The Astros would love to have him back. The Dodgers, you never know. I mean, the Blue Jays, could use outfield help in a veteran. The White Sox, some stability alongside their two young stars. There's a lot of places that Brantley could end up. And, again, like I said, high contact hitter, 15 to 20 homer power, solid glove. He's very well known at this point. He does have an injury risk. He's getting older, but he has been more durable in recent years, actually. He dealt with an injury this past year that he played mostly through, but was limited his numbers a little bit. But heading into this past season, he played 140-plus games for 2 straight years. I'm predicting the Nationals 3 years, $39 million for Brantley. That's my call, but again, I could see the Blue Jays being a logical fit. I could see Houston bringing him back if George Springer signs elsewhere. A lot of options for Brantley, but I think I'm going to go with my prediction is it was the Nationals at 3 years, $39 million. My number 6 free agent this offseason is the one player that we do have certainty on now, so I'm not going to talk about him a lot. It's Marcus Stroman. Stroman was in my opinion, the second best free agent, second best starter set to be potentially on the free agent market, and I ranked him as such. 29 years old. He didn't pitch at all this past year. He started out dealing with an injury, then he opted out due to COVID concerns with the Mets. Not his concerns with the Mets, but he was a Met, and he opted out due to COVID concerns. And so the number of teams that could have used him, big list. Despite that, he's still been very reliable, durable. A solid number 2 or great number 3 for most clubs, but he ended up accepting the Mets 1 year $18.9 million qualifying offer last week, I think it was. So Marcus Stroman, no longer a free agent, he's off the board. So really, there's just one starter we're going to get to who just really stands above the rest on the market. But Marcus Stroman, I had projected that maybe he ends up in New York with the Yankees, but 1 year, $18.9 million qualifying offer accepted with the Mets. My number 5 ranked free agent this offseason is Marcell Ozuna. Incredible year with the Braves this past season. A 1 year, $18 million goodness, I'm running out of words. He accepted a 1 year, $18 million deal with the Braves this past offseason after seeing his market kind of hurt after the Cardinals extended him a qualifying offer. And it turned out to be the steal of the offseason, this past offseason. He led the National League with 18 homers, 56 RBI, a career-high OPS of over 1,000, and just a sensational season for Marcell Ozuna in the middle of that Braves lineup that was just so fantastic. Now, Ozuna is actually younger than Brantley and my top-ranked free agent outfielder. But he's not a great defender in the outfield, and a team that would sign him would most likely want to use him mostly at the DH role. And again, like I said, uncertainty about the DH in the National League for this upcoming year. So I could see Ozuna waiting to sign a while. But if there's an AL team, like maybe the White Sox, who I project will sign him, or maybe the Rangers, they could just sweep in, offer him enough, and say he could say, I'm not, I'm ready to go. I'm signing that deal. So my prediction for him is that he signs with the White Sox. That would be just such a fun addition to that lineup. I don't know if they're going to be willing to spend that kind of money, but 4 years, $68 million is my prediction for Ozuna. I'm going with the White Sox. I think the Rangers are another possibility. They want to add some thump to their lineup. The Red Sox, maybe the Nationals, if they're confident about the DH. And a return to Atlanta would also make a good deal of sense. But my prediction for Ozuna is the White Sox. DJ LeMahieu, my fourth-ranked free agent this offseason, 32 years old, signed a 2-year, $24 million contract with the Yankees prior to the 2019 season, and has been outstanding the last 2 years. Just outstanding. The longtime Colorado Rocky, who people feared would struggle or not be the same kind of player outside of Coors Field. Well, he won a Silver Slugger in 2019, hitting 26 home runs, and he was even better this past year in the shortened season. Won his second career batting title. OPS was a career high, over 1,000. Led the AL in OPS. He's 32 years old, like I said. His defense isn't what it used to be. He's mostly a second baseman. He can also play first, also play third. But his hitting profile figures to age pretty well. The Yankees would love to have him back. That's one of the big questions for them this offseason is the Yankees want DJ LeMahieu back. But are they willing to pay him what he's going to cost this time around? And are they comfortable with Gleyber Torres at shortstop? Those are questions for them. My prediction for LeMahieu, it's a little outside the box. I'm calling that he ends up with the Dodgers. 4 years, $72 million is my prediction for him. Now, it's probably unlikely that both LeMahieu and Turner end up on the Dodgers, but it's possible. Of course, LeMahieu has that flexibility to play all around the infield. He could take over at second base full time. He could fill in at third or first or whatever. I'm saying Dodgers, 4 years, $72 million, but there are a lot of other possible fits, including a return to New York, heading to Toronto, play for the Blue Jays. They've got openings, and also the Nationals could be a fit for LeMahieu as well, along with several other teams. A great player, an underrated player. Now, of course, he's getting his attention now, but a really, really solid, really strong player who's had some sensational years the past 2 years with the Yankees. My third-ranked free agent is the top free agent outfielder on the market, and that's George Springer. Many of the Astros this past year struggled in wake of the whole team sign-stealing scandal. Whether you want to tie that together, connect that at all, I don't know. But I'm not getting into that. But Springer just kept chugging along this past year. He had a OPS about 900, completely in line with his production over the past several years. He's undoubtedly the best outfielder on the market. He can play a solid center field if you need him to. But he's also really solid in the corners as well. And he would be a good fit for any club who needs an outfielder and a middle-of-the-order bat. A guy who just hits home runs. He's not, he's probably not going to, hit 40 home runs or anything, but just a really solid, 30 homer. He steals a couple bags, good defense, solid batting average. The Nationals could use the help. The Cardinals could use the help. The Mets could be in the mix. He could return to Houston. There's so many options. I'm going to say that Ozuna leaves the Braves, and that the Braves then sign Springer to a 5-year, $110 million contract. That's my prediction, but there are a lot of fits for him as well, like the Cardinals, like the Nationals, like the Mets. They seem to be interested, even though they have a lot of outfielders, so we'll see how that plays out. My second-ranked free agent outfielder is free agent this offseason, is the top starter on the market. It's Trevor Bauer. He was just named the NL Cy Young winner. We talked about it. We've talked about Trevor Bauer before. I don't really need to get to an explanation of how good he has been this past season. And he's going to get a big payday if he ends up taking a long-term deal. Now, there is still this possibility. He's talked about one-year deals in the past, wanting to take one-year deals. Maybe the market doesn't develop given the circumstances of this offseason and the monetary uncertainties, and he ends up taking a one-year deal because he thinks he can get more next offseason. That's possible. And that would bring potentially the Reds back into the fold and re-signing him on a bigger level. Maybe they sign him to a multi-year deal, but that would bring in a lot of teams if he's willing to take a one-year deal. But I still think he's going to get as top starting pitchers or a small hot commodity. I mean, everybody wants this great starting pitcher, so you're gonna get a good deal if you're one of the best starting pitchers on the market. I project a 4-year, $100 million contract with the Angels. That's a team that has its star hitters, but could really use that reliable starting pitcher. I think that they would be a good fit for Bauer, but maybe the Mets, maybe the Yankees, maybe the White Sox. There are a lot of potential fits for Bauer. My prediction is Angels 4 years, $100 million. Top free agent this offseason, in my opinion, and there's been some debate among similar lists of whether it might be Bauer or whether it might be Springer or whatever. But I'm going with the catcher, the best catcher in baseball right now, JT Realmuto. He was traded from the Marlins to the Phillies, of course. They gave up highly regarded pitching prospect Sixto Sanchez, who kind of had a breakout with the Marlins this past season, but there was no guarantee they'd be able to keep him beyond a couple years, and now he is a free agent. He wants a big contract. I mean, it's been expressed. One report he's looking for a contract potentially as high as $200 million. Now, I don't think that's anywhere near going to happen, but we shall see. The Phillies would love to have him. The Phillies kind of need to do something this offseason. It was a bad season for them, but I don't know if they're going to be able to afford to keep him, or they can afford it, or they're going to be willing to pay that cost. The Yankees, we know they've got this catcher situation in flux. They could trade Gary Sanchez and sign Realmuto, but the perfect fit to me seems to be the Mets. I'm going with the Mets. Steve Cohen and company want to make a splash. I think he ends up on the Mets. That's my prediction. 5 years, $125 million is my prediction on the contract for JT Realmuto. A lot of possibilities for him, though. A lot of teams would love a great catcher. A lot of teams would love the best catcher in baseball. But my prediction is the New York Mets is where he lands. All right, coming up on the top of the hour, a real quick break back with what's on deck next here on Around the Bases from 110 Sports. Welcome back one final time to this Tuesday, November 17th edition of Around the Bases. Not much time. I didn't leave much time left for what's on deck, but fortunately, I don't have a lot to say in this segment, actually. No major announcements or league-wide deadlines coming up for free agency in the next couple of days. Of course, there are going to be news things that pop up that we can't foresee, but nothing major, no Hall of Fame announcements, nothing of that nature or that type coming up in the next day or two. But coming up on Around the Bases on Thursday, we'll go through the latest headlines and storylines that pop up over the course of the next couple of days. We'll also dive back into our off-season previews or overviews. We talked about the NL and AL East on Thursday of last week. This Thursday, it's the Central divisions. The AL and NL Central will give you an overview of how those teams did and a reminder of how they did in 2020, what they've done so far this offseason, what they learned this past season, what their needs are this offseason, what their key questions are right now. A lot to talk about. We'll dive into that for the Central Division and all those teams, those 10 teams coming up on Thursday's show. Also, make sure to check out the latest coverage that we have for you right now at 110sportsmedia.com. We've got our East Division offseason guides that I published last week. We've got NBA draft coverage. We've got college basketball conference previews, European soccer, top 25, and a lot more at the website right now. But that's going to do it for this edition of Around the Bases from 110 Sports. Josh Molnix will be back at 11 a.m. Eastern tomorrow with his show, Josh Doring, at 1 p.m. Eastern on Thursday, and Josh Doring back at 11 a.m. Eastern, I should say, on Thursday. And Around the Bases, back with you again at 1 p.m. on Thursday. So thanks for watching. Take care of each other, and I'll talk to you again on Thursday.